Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Jennifer Caddick. I'm the Vice President of Communications and Engagement here at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. We're very excited to have almost 400 people registered for this seminar today. We're looking forward to talking with all of you. A couple of housekeeping items first. We are recording this webinar, and we will make that recording available afterwards in case you would like to share it with anyone who might be interested in this topic. I want to introduce the people that we have with us on our end here at the Alliance today. We have Joel Brimmeier, our President and CEO, and Molly Flanagan, our Vice President for Policy, both here in our Chicago office. We'll also be joined by Crystal Davis, our Policy Director, who leads up our Ohio office based in Cleveland. You can see on your screen, we will leave time at the end for question and answer. All participants will be muted throughout the presentation because we have so many people on the phone. You can enter questions at any time by using the question box on the right hand of your screen or the left hand of your screen with your GoToMeeting bar. So that's how you can enter questions. You can enter questions at any time throughout the webinar or at the end, and we'll leave plenty of time for questions. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Joel Brimmeier, the Alliance for the Great Lakes President and CEO.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day to chat about the Great Lakes. I know that because you're on this call, it's something that is near and dear to your heart, just like it is all of the other folks on the call and everybody here at the Alliance. I also know or truly believe that the Great Lakes and clean water are a unifier for our region and really are what sets the Great Lakes region apart from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. Everybody on the phone today knows that we have about 20% of the world's fresh surface water right here in our backyard. And that's a value that we hold really dear at the Alliance, and I know that everybody on this call does as well. It's something that brings people together across generations and across divisions, and that's something that we believe is actually at risk right now here in the Great Lakes region, and it's something we're going to have to work really hard to keep in place. We know that, for example, today our drinking water supply here in the Great Lakes is under threat. Over the last several years, we've seen massive toxic algae blooms at a scale unseen in a generation that had the unfortunate effect of shutting down a major city, Toledo's water supply a couple of years ago, and we've continued to see drinking water threats from other sources around the Great Lakes region, including in places like Flint, Michigan, and Kewaunee County, Wisconsin. So our drinking water is under assault. We also have seen risks to the Great Lakes from issues like invasive species like Asian carp, which continue to threaten to get into the Great Lakes in the face of insufficient federal action, which we'll talk about in just a moment. The good news, though, is that our Great Lakes region does have a history of working across party lines to solve problems, whether it is keeping our Great Lakes water supply in place here through policies like the Great Lakes Water Resources Compact, restoring and clean water through programs like the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We know and these programs and other policies like them are ones that were brought to life because people in the Great Lakes collaborated and cooperated because they knew at the end of the day that this freshwater resource is what makes our place unique. We know that regardless of who you voted for, the people of the Great Lakes and the people of the Midwest did not vote against the Great Lakes. So what we're experiencing right now is a challenge to our region to come back and tell why this water is so important to each and every one of us and why we have to keep up the job of protecting and restoring the lakes. So we're here today ultimately to ask you to act to be part of the solution to the challenges we're facing. And before we do that, we are going to talk to you about some of the facts on the ground that we're hearing, especially from Washington. And to do that today, we've asked our Vice President for Policy, Molly Flanagan, to join us. Molly?
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for being on this webinar today. Some of you, many of you, may be familiar with my name because I send you emails pretty regularly asking you to take action on our policy agenda, and thank you to all of you who take those actions. It really does make a difference. I've been to Washington, D.C. 3 times over the past 6 weeks. It's kind of crazy there. There's a lot going on. I've been talking to Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate in all 8 of our Great Lakes states. And I've got some good news and some bad news on developments related to the Great Lakes. First, you may have seen in the media that President Trump's proposed budget zeroes out funding for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative has been getting $300 million a year for many years, and it supports on-the-ground protection and restoration projects in each of the 8 Great Lakes states. So not very popular that he's taken this program from $300 million down to 0. He's also proposed major cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency and to other agencies that are working hard every day to protect the Great Lakes. The flip side of this is that our Great Lakes Congressional delegation is pretty unhappy about these proposals. Whether you talk to Republicans or Democrats in the states, they are ready and united to fight some of these cuts, in particular, the cuts to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. You know, one of the things that that program has going for it is that it does support projects in every state, and those projects help bolster the economy and create jobs in local communities. And so members of Congress don't want to see those dollars evaporate. Again, on the bad news side, aquatic invasive species. We've got some bad bills introduced in the House and Senate that would weaken protections against new invasions. If you've heard of zebra mussels or sea lamprey, we're trying to keep the next invaders out of the Great Lakes. And unfortunately, these bad bills would make it a lot harder to keep those things out of the lakes. On the good news side, again, we have congressional champions who have been standing strong for years now against these attacks on invasive species legislation. And so, you know, it's a good thing that we have strong champions from the Great Lakes to help us fight these issues. On Asian carp, the flying fish you saw during Joel's remarks, there was a study that was supposed to be released on February 28th of this year that the Army Corps of Engineers has completed that would have detailed some additional protections against Asian carp getting into the Great Lakes. But at the 11th hour, the White House pulled that study. And so it hasn't been released. We haven't had a chance to see it. There was supposed to be a public comment period, and now that's in limbo. Our congressional delegation and a number of the Great Lakes states are working really hard alongside us to try to get that study released. But so far, we don't have any signs of movement. So we're going to keep pushing the administration to let that study come out into the light so that those of you on the phone and others have a chance to comment on it. In terms of drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, the American Society of Civil Engineers recently put out their 2017 infrastructure report card. And unfortunately, our wastewater infrastructure got a D+, and our drinking water infrastructure got a D. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure if I had brought home those grades, my parents would have been unhappy. I bet if your kids or grandkids brought home those grades, you'd be unhappy. This is not acceptable. It's something we need to fix. And the truth is that much of our water infrastructure across the country and in the Great Lakes is really getting to the end of its useful life. And so what we need is more funding at the local level, the state level, the federal level, to upgrade water infrastructure and to ensure that everyone in the Great Lakes region has access to safe and affordable Great Lakes drinking water. Congress and the Trump administration have been talking about the desire to do something positive on infrastructure. One of the big questions that remains is where that money is going to come from. And also, when you talk about infrastructure, are you just talking about roads and bridges, or are you talking about things like drinking water lines and sewage? And this is complicated because what we want is to make sure that we get additional funding for water and wastewater infrastructure upgrades, and that we're protecting low-income people and low-income communities so that they're not overburdened by spiking water bills. So we're going to keep talking to local communities. We're going to keep talking to people like you and to members of Congress to try to figure out how to do this, how to get more funding for water infrastructure, and how to make sure that vulnerable communities are protected in the process. So I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you we've got an uphill battle ahead of us. But we do have some really strong allies in Congress. And we've got some great opportunities to work with state and local elected officials on issues closer to home here in the region to make progress. So I don't want you to despair. It's not all bad news. We've got a lot of work to do. And I think if we continue to unite together to try to push these things that are important to us, we're going to be heard. So several weeks ago, the last time I was in DC, actually was with a number of Alliance for the Great Lakes staff and also a number of advocates around the Great Lakes region. The Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition every year hosts Great Lakes Days, where they bring advocates in to talk to members of Congress about the importance of Great Lakes protection and restoration. And ahead of going to DC this year, we asked you, what do you think? Why do you think the Great Lakes are worth protecting? And you responded with a number of amazing reasons and stories about why the Great Lakes are important to you. And we took those messages that you sent to us to Congress when we went to Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you, staff and members of Congress loved it. They loved the stories that you told, the anecdotes about why the Great Lakes are important to you, and they told us that they're going to use your quotes and stories to make the case for continued support for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. They're planning to share your thoughts and ideas with their colleagues in Congress to build support across the country for this important funding. And we were reminded by congressional offices that while the president gets to propose a budget, it's Congress that actually holds the purse strings, and they're the ones that get to set the budget. And so even though President Trump's budget is bad news for the Great Lakes, our members of Congress are telling us that's a non-starter and are willing to work together to set a budget and fund a budget that's going to be good for the Great Lakes. And now I want to turn it over to Crystal Davis, our policy director in Cleveland, Ohio. She was at Great Lakes Days as well, and she's going to tell us what she heard from our Ohio congressional office.
Thank you, Molly. Good afternoon, all. As Molly noted, I had the great pleasure of attending Great Lakes Days in D.C., along with several of my colleagues, and we met with a great number of Ohio congressional delegation members. We didn't get around to seeing all of them, but we had a lot of very meaningful meetings. It was encouraging to hear that they're supportive of our efforts and will oppose the budget as proposed. And so they were very vocal about being in opposition to the budget as proposed, and so the rest of the meeting was really spent talking about what can we do, how can we be helpful in this fight, what can we tell our constituents to do. And the number one response among all of them was to keep the conversation going. Talk to the media, write op-eds, encourage others, your family and friends, because this issue affects us all. It's not a partisan issue. It's an issue that transcends race and socioeconomic status. And so we all need to come together, talk to all of your friends and family and colleagues, and get them to be vocal on this issue and to weigh in with elected officials. We also want to make sure that we're getting folks from various sectors to weigh in as well. This is not an issue that just affects the environmental community. It affects manufacturing and business and those who recreate on the lakes and those in the higher education and research communities. So we all need to come together to make our voices heard on this issue. Right after this webinar today, I will be participating along with a lot of my environmental colleagues in a roundtable discussion led by Senator Rob Portman on GLRI right here in Cleveland. And so I'm looking forward to taking those stories that you've sent us to that meeting as well. And we thank you for your action on these issues. I'll turn it back over to Joel.
Thanks, Crystal. And so what can we do about this? Everybody here on the phone is here because they want to be part of the solution, and we want to keep making progress here in the Great Lakes. So what I want to ask you to do today is, number one, remember, as Crystal was saying, that your voice counts now more than ever. And I'm going to ask you to make a commitment for the for the rest of this year, that you'll have your own Great Lakes Action Plan, your plan to tell the world why the Great Lakes are important to you. And there's a few easy ways that you can do that. Number one is that you can visit our action webpage at takeaction.greatlakes.org, where we always work to keep our action alerts for members of Congress and decision makers around the region up to date. So you can comment directly on issues like invasive species, like Great Lakes program funding, and like drinking water and protection and the elimination of sewage overflows. So go to takeaction.greatlakes.org to see what's available to you now. And beyond that, I'd even ask you to pick up the phone, call your member of Congress, call your senator's offices, and tell them how important the Great Lakes are to you. Cutting through the noise in Washington with issues like the Great Lakes that matter is critically important right now, and when your members of Congress and senators' staffs pick up those phones, that call really matters. So please take the time to do that. The second thing is doing something similar but doing it close to home. Talk about the importance of the Great Lakes and clean water, whether it's with friends, family, at work, at church, wherever makes sense for you, on social media. These kinds of conversations and reminding ourselves that that the Great Lakes and clean water are uniters that are more powerful than things that divide us is critically important here in the Great Lakes region today, and it's going to be that way for months to come and years to come. We've got to make sure that everybody knows how important these resources are to us. And finally, I just want to tell you that over the next few weeks and months, we're going to be sending you more information about opportunities to get involved directly in protecting the Great Lakes, whether that's as a volunteer in your community or as an advocate in communities around the Great Lakes region. And so look forward to that from us. And with that, I think we are going to wrap up the presentation part of this and move into any questions that you may have.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We have a bunch of questions that people have already submitted, and for those of you who would like to submit a question on your GoToMeeting bar, there should be an option to click questions, click the little down arrow and type it in, and we as organizers will see those questions and try and answer as many as we can. So I'm going to start off with a question from Tim Oravec, and he asks kind of a specific question, but maybe we can talk more generally. He's asking about the bill numbers for the proposed legislation that might keep it more difficult to keep invasive species out of the Great Lakes. But maybe you could talk about the different pieces of legislation, Molly, that we know are underway right now.
I absolutely can. So there is a bill in the Senate. It's Senate Bill 168, and a bill in the House, House Bill 1154. They're identical pieces of legislation, and what they would do is roll back protections that are currently in place that require ships entering the Great Lakes and other waters of the United States from treating their ballast water. So ships use ballast water to help balance themselves when they're taking on cargo or unloading cargo. And so if a ship takes on ballast water somewhere internationally, they suck up that water, and with it, they're sucking up organisms in the water. And so this is actually how zebra mussels got into the Great Lakes, is that ships brought in ballast water, and when they discharged that water, when they were taking on cargo in the region, along with the water, they discharged zebra mussels. And so now we have zebra and quagga mussels all over the Great Lakes. So what we need is really strong protections in place. And unfortunately, the shipping community doesn't want strong regulations, and some members of the House and Senate would like to make it easier for them to meet those regulations. And so Senate Bill 168 and House Bill 1154 are both bad bills that would leave the Great Lakes more vulnerable to new invasive species.
Thanks, Molly. I'll take our next question from Travis Solberg, which I think is an interesting question. He asks, and maybe Joel could answer this, what is President Trump's contingency plan? Are funds or regulation efforts going straight to state funding, relying on private funding? Will grants be available? I think that's a good question about what might happen if there are reductions in federal funding and maybe what the philosophy is there that we're hearing from the administration.
There's definitely a couple of angles to what we're seeing in the administration. One, there is an ideological component to the way that budget was structured, and that what I mean by that is that there is a budget. The budget that was put forward does assume that a lot of that work would and should be done by the states rather than the federal government. I don't believe that that is possible, and that these federal agencies have played and historically played and still need to play a substantial coordinating and oversight role in collaboration with the states. And so trying to defer all of that, of the costs of protecting and restoring the Great Lakes to the states is simply a non-starter. On the infrastructure side, on the question about the private investment, prior to the election, there was a plan put forward that would have basically provided substantial tax breaks for private investment in water and other forms of infrastructure. What we've heard is that that approach is simply not going to be adequate to address the water needs of communities around the Great Lakes and around the country. And what's good is that there's a conversation beginning in Congress about how a water investment package would actually be helpful, and that would include different types of financing, including both private and public options, as well as protections for communities that are vulnerable to the costs of the potentially high costs of water infrastructure. And so some approach that combines those approaches is probably what's needed to win the day, but it's very much still in the early stages of that conversation.
Thanks, Joel. I see a couple of questions in various forms, but they kind of get at the same thing, so I'll combine them together. And they're questions from people who are saying that, we're fortunate to have lawmakers in their state who have been very supportive of Great Lakes issues. And I'm seeing a couple of questions asking if it's important to still to contact those elected officials, and is that still a worthwhile effort to still write those officials and even thank them for their support? Molly?
Yeah, so a really great question. What do you do with members of Congress who are already on your side on these issues? One, definitely call, email, send letters, use social media to thank those members of Congress for their support. The other thing that we've heard from congressional offices who are on side with us is that it's really helpful to have stories to share about how the Great Lakes impact people's lives, and about how, if the Great Lakes were polluted, or, your drinking water is polluted, how that would impact people's lives. And so sharing your stories with members of Congress who can then share those stories with other people is something that we've heard is really valuable. And so, one, thank your supportive members of Congress. Two, if you've got a good Great Lakes story, send that to them. And then three, you can also ask members of Congress, if you get a staffer on the phone, what more can you do to help? Thank you so much for being on our side on the Great Lakes. What can I do to help you? And sometimes they'll have some really great ideas for you. So definitely, don't only call people who aren't with us. Go ahead and call those Great Lakes champions as well.
Thanks, Molly. We have a comment and a question from Dendra Best. She makes a comment that we are possibly missing a significant ally in the public and environmental health agencies, and also asking about emphasizing environmental justice as a goal, and concerns and comments sometimes that conservation is kind of an elitist activity. Joel, do you want to answer that question?
I'll provide a comment, and there may be others that want to comment on that as well. And thanks for asking the question. With regard to the first one, I think it's absolutely correct that what we're seeing, we often get distracted a little bit by the name of the agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, but what we're really talking about is the protection of the health of people, of children, of older people, and other populations around the Great Lakes region. And that public health protection needs to be something that's available and equitable for everybody who lives in the Great Lakes. The reality that I see is that when we talk about federal program cuts or erosion of our federal environmental protections, those cuts and those erosions do not affect all communities around the Great Lakes equally. Some are more affected than others. And in fact, we are seeing in various places around the Great Lakes, like Southeast Chicago, like East Chicago, which is actually in Indiana, like Flint, like rural counties in Wisconsin, where people are being affected in that they cannot access drinking water, that their children are being poisoned. And those things are happening in some places more than others, and that often breaks down across racial and income and wealth lines here in the Great Lakes region. So we have to make sure that we are paying very close attention to making sure that those protections that we depend on are available to everybody in the region. And there may be others who want to comment on that as well.
Molly or Crystal, would you like to chime in on that?
Crystal, I know you've met with some folks in the environmental and public health sphere in Cleveland. I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that front.
No, I think part of the issue is being able to communicate with our communities that this issue transcends race and especially socioeconomic status. Our disadvantaged communities are actually being hit the hardest. And so we want to make sure that they understand, that everybody understands that this is an issue that isn't just pertinent to wealthy folks. And so we're doing a lot of work in Cleveland to simplify these issues and help everyone to understand that this is affecting everybody's daily lives. And once folks understand how this affects your daily life, they want to get more involved. And we've been working with local health authorities to be able to learn more about how it affects public health. And so we can take those messages on the road as well.
Thanks, Crystal.
Great, thanks. We have a question from Erica Flock, who says, it's great to see groups like the Great Lakes Business Network come forward to advocate for the Great Lakes. How can we encourage more coalition building like this and develop a common vision?
That's a great question, and we're seeing a theme here about who are those different voices in the region that can be activated around protecting and restoring the Great Lakes, whether it's business leaders or the public health community, and many others that I'm sure everybody on the phone can think of. That's a great effort that's elevating business leaders to protect clean water, particularly with an eye toward the Line 5 pipeline and the Straits of Mackinac. What we've got to do here in the Great Lakes, just focusing on the business community for a moment, is really figure out not only how work to protect and restore the Great Lakes protects the water that we all care about, but also makes the economic vitality of our region possible and sustainable for generations to come. We know just by observing what we see on the street and what we see when we go on vacation and travel around the Great Lakes, that clean water, water-based recreation, water-based tourism is central and core to the economies of dozens of communities around the Great Lakes region. We have to work hard to put real numbers behind those assumptions. We've got to be able to talk to our members of Congress and tell them about the economic benefits that the Great Lakes bring. Data like the fact that the Great Lakes support 1.5 million jobs around the region and generate more than $60 billion in wages every year. Drilling down into that in terms of how that affects specific cities, specific counties is something that we're working on here at the Alliance. And that kind of information can help us generate new partnerships that can go and tell the Great Lakes story from different angles. We need all messengers on deck here in the Great Lakes.
Great. We have a couple related questions, so I'll lump them together, and they're sort of getting at the fact that there's been news reports that it's not just Great Lakes funding that is at risk, but also areas like the Everglades or the Chesapeake Bay. And so I think the questions are we here in the Great Lakes region teaming up with other regions around the country or other states to raise awareness and sort of come together and build coalitions on these issues that threaten water bodies across the country? Molly, can you take that one?
Yeah, for better or worse, we are definitely in distinguished company in that it's not just Great Lakes funding that's been zeroed out in President Trump's proposed budget, but also funding for regional programs across the country. And so, yes, we absolutely are partnering with organizations and advocates in other parts of the country who are also fighting back against these proposed cuts. We're encouraging members of Congress to sign on to letters supporting not just Great Lakes funding, but funding for those other regional programs that are so important to water quality and public health and environmental health in other parts of the country. And so, yes, we're absolutely having those conversations both with other organizations across the country through something called the America's Great Waters Coalition, and we're also having those conversations with Great Lakes Congressional offices.
Thanks, Molly. We have a question from TJ Pinatero, who I'll shorten it a little bit, but he asks, 63 members of the House this week from both parties signed a letter requesting federal appropriations to restore GLRI, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And the question is the Great Lakes Congressional Delegation really together on the Great Lakes issue, or are there disparate opinions as to how to tackle Great Lakes restoration? Joel?
It's important to recognize that the Great Lakes as an issue is huge, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is one part of that issue, and that's all about restoring the Great Lakes from past damage and working to prevent new damage from invasive species like Asian carp. That funding and the coordination that comes with it is critically important, and I do believe that there is a strong coalition of members of Congress who are fully behind the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. In fact, the Republican-led Congress authorized the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative as a federal program for the first time at the end of 2016. However, we also have a lot of other environmental programs, both within EPA and in other parts of the federal government, that are being targeted for major cuts. And we don't know yet if we're going to see the kind of backbone from Congress across the aisle to actually stand up for all of the federal protections that we need to keep the Great Lakes clean and to keep people in the Great Lakes safe. That's something that's going to be worked out over the course of the federal budgeting process over the next few months, but it's really important that we send the message that standing strong on Great Lakes funding is important, but also standing strong on the protections that federal agencies provide to people and clean water is critical as well.
Great, thanks, Joel. I see a follow-up from TJ that we'll also tackle as well, because I think this is an important point. And the follow-up question is it an oversight that some representatives might not have signed that letter that he referenced, or are there holdouts on the GLRI, especially from districts right along the Great Lakes itself? Molly, you've been on the Hill a lot lately.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in Congress right now. And I think, and actually when I'm done talking, Crystal, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about what you heard from Congresswoman Fudge's office about this. There's a lot going on. People are getting asked to sign a lot of letters, and sometimes they're missing things. And so, I think it is less a reflection about individual members not being supportive of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and more that the letter wasn't brought to their attention. Crystal, do you want to elaborate that from what you heard?
Sure. So internally, they call these Dear Colleague letters. And so there are so many letters going around right now. It's pretty unbelievable. I know I talked with one congressional office, and they said they literally had hundreds of Dear Colleague letters to still review and decide whether or not they were going to sign. And so when you have 100 or a couple hundred extra emails, 300 extra emails in your box, and you still have to respond to constituents and everything else, all the daily work that they have to do regularly. Some of these Dear Colleague letters are getting lost, and so they don't make the letters available to the public when they're in draft form and they're sending them internally, but your congressional member may tell you, hey, I have a letter on GLRI that I'm sending around. Could you bring that to the attention of other congressional members? And that's what one of the offices did with us, the Ohio Environmental Organizations, when we were sitting in a meeting with them during Great Lakes Days. They said, hey, we have a letter on GLRI, and we don't have any other Ohio signers. And so that's something that I brought up in other meetings with other congressional members. And once I brought it to their attention, they actually searched for that member's name and made sure to sign on. So they kind of need our help with that, with bringing some of these things to to other members' attention. So things are just kind of getting lost in the sauce a little bit. That was a nice way of putting it.
It's certainly saucy in Washington these days. We have a question here, but thanks, Crystal. We have a question from Mike McKay, who asks, as the Great Lakes are a binational resource, are there not already some protections built in through existing organizations such as the International Joint Commission and treaties like the Great Lakes Water Agreement? I imagine some of the actions proposed may contravene international treaties. Joel, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So it's great to recognize that, in fact, the United States is only half the story when it comes to the Great Lakes. And Canada obviously has a huge geographic presence on the Great Lakes, and in the past several years has made some stronger commitments to Great Lakes protection and restoration, which is fantastic. And so the question about, do the treaties actually protect the Great Lakes, is a good one. For those of you who don't know this, there is a treaty called the Boundary Waters Treaty between the U.S. and Canada, which provides some basic protections for the quantity of water in the Great Lakes and potentially some protections for the cleanliness of that water. There's also a Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement between the U.S. and Canada, but it's important to note that that agreement is entirely voluntary in nature. It's not actually a treaty itself. What that means is that depending on who is running the federal government will determine how much time and money and leadership is provided to the implementation of that water quality agreement we have with Canada. And so we did see a new version of that agreement signed with Canada during in 2012 under the previous administration. What we are concerned about, certainly with the cuts to U.S. EPA in particular, is that that's going to signal a lack of ability of EPA to actually follow through on what it committed to in the agreement. And that's definitely of concern, which is why it's so important to make sure that the legal protections we have already in place in the United States for clean water stay in place and are enforced.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from Hannah Maiko. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, Hannah. She asks, what kinds of boots on the ground work can local organizations be doing to support Congress? Molly, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, again, that members of Congress are really looking for are stories and also opportunities when they're at home in the district. They're actually going home into the district next week, and they're always looking for opportunities to get out and actually see work that local organizations in their districts are doing. It's a great opportunity for them to highlight their support of that work. It's a great opportunity for local organizations to highlight their work. The media often comes out to those events, and so, you know, in terms of those local organizations, which I know many of you are part of, inviting your members of Congress to come out and see projects, meeting with members of Congress when they're home in the district, you know, bringing people to those meetings. Those are all ways that you can get your message across and also help members of Congress tell stories and get positive attention for the Great Lakes.
Thanks, Molly. We have a question from Becky Ewing. Apologies if I mispronounce your last name, Becky. She asked, can you talk about the role executive orders play in policy? Will the rush of executive orders, but these are things being signed by the president, with the rush of executive orders being signed, are there emerging issues that will affect the Great Lakes and the environment?
Hi, Becky. Great to see you on the screen. So it really depends on the type of executive order. You know, there are some things like rolling back previous executive orders that a president can do. So, you know, President Obama can sign an executive order, President Trump can get rid of it. But then there are other things where the president signs an executive order. President Trump's climate change executive order this week is an example of this, where what the president does is set some intentions in an executive order, but then it still requires an act of Congress or acts by the agency to actually implement what's been put in that executive order. And so, you know, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. There's a lot of things that can be done through executive order, but there are also a lot of things that the president can't do by himself. And that's one of the reasons, you know, we have the balance of power in the U.S. government is so, you know, no one person or one chamber can ride roughshod over all of the other ones. And that's why it's so important that we bolster our members of Congress in the Great Lakes delegation so that they're not taking actions to implement executive orders that we think are negative. So things, you know, things on climate change for sure are being attacked lately, which definitely has impacts for the Great Lakes. Things about, you know, various agencies and what they are and aren't allowed to do. All of those things have impacts on the Great Lakes.
Thanks, Molly. Before we get to our next question, I just want to note there are a lot of comments and questions here about information on how to contact Congress, how to get information, the phone numbers for congressional offices, and links to some of the resources we've talked about on the call today. You will be receiving a follow-up email later today with a bunch of that information in it. So keep an eye out for a lot more information from us both today and in the coming weeks. But we will compile a lot of that information together for you and send that out later today. So great questions, and we're excited to hear that you are interested in getting involved. The next question is from Frank Ruswick, and I'm going to give this one to Joel. The question is there any organizational structure among the Great Lakes Congressional Delegation in support of Great Lakes issues, or is it essentially decentralized efforts among individual members of Congress, state delegations, or political parties?
Thanks, Frank. The Great Lakes region has something called the Great Lakes Legislative Task Force, and so there is a caucus within Congress for the Great Lakes. It is a nonpartisan, or I should say a bipartisan caucus, and so that means that sometimes you have groupings of members of Congress who get together on an issue that are all members of the same party. In the Great Lakes Congressional Caucus is actually a bipartisan one, and it's organized by a group called the Northeast Midwest Institute. So that caucus is something that we always encourage Great Lakes members of Congress to join and be an active part of for a couple of good reasons. One is it keeps the lines of communication open, meaning that when we have things like letters that we talked about earlier that are circulating in Congress, it creates an easy way to get that information around to members of Congress in the Great Lakes. And it also helps to develop some collegiality between members of Congress. Sometimes you'll have two members who might be in different parties who don't see eye to eye on one issue, but on the Great Lakes, they find some common ground and can actually have a conversation, and we really want to encourage that. So I do encourage people that anytime they're talking to their members of Congress to make sure that they are part of the Great Lakes Congressional Task Force.
Great. Thanks, Joel. We have a question from Lisa Harris. She says, I haven't heard much about the business impacts with reduced protections. Industry needs clean water too. Do we have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I am always learning is that the quote business community or quote industrial community is not one big block. So there certainly are lots of businesses that depend on clean water for their ability to operate. Breweries are a really great example here in the Great Lakes region. And there are lots of Great Lakes breweries that have been really active in supporting protections for the Great Lakes. And then the Great Lakes Business Network that was referenced earlier is another example of businesses coming together to make it known that clean water is necessary for their operations. Unfortunately, this isn't the case across business. And that's not to say, you know, it's not like there are businesses that actually want dirty water. It's just a matter of what they're willing to give up in order to have clean water. And there are some businesses that are willing to accept more regulations or more costs potentially to protect the Great Lakes, and some businesses that aren't. But certainly we have a lot of businesses in the Great Lakes that rely on clean water and that are already active in efforts to protect and restore the Great Lakes.
Great, thanks, Molly. Our next question comes from Bernice Valentinas, and she asks, what will be the impact on Region 5 EPA ongoing programs given proposed budget cuts? Is EPA activity already scaling back?
Well, to my knowledge, we're still in the implementation phase of the current year's budget for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and we're operating under that existing funding, which is good for the Great Lakes for now. My biggest concern about the potential cuts to Region 5 with regard to the Great Lakes is that the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative cuts would not just eliminate the funding that is being pushed out into communities to do good work on the ground, which is what's most important. But it would also eliminate the office within Region 5 that is actually responsible for planning and executing that work at the federal level, the Great Lakes National Program Office. And that's something that is of great concern because it actually would remove that sort of support system from Region 5 that ensures that work proceeds in a way that's well coordinated and effective.
Great. Thanks, Joel. I will note that we have a couple people who have submitted events that are coming up, which I think is great. There's a lot of activity going on around the region. Lucinda Stanley has shared information with us about an event called All Hands on Deck that is happening on July 3rd. And I know that they have a Facebook page, so you can just go on Facebook and just type in All Hands on Deck and learn more about that event. And then I also have a comment, which, sorry, I'm trying to find right here, from Dendra Best, asking, her organization is doing an Earth Month series of online events each Tuesday. April is Earth Month. We're very excited to get started into April tomorrow. And their website is wastewatereducation.org. And one of the events is called Imagine a Day Without Environmental Health Staff. We also have a question, so thank you for sending those events along to us. We also have a question from someone, Michelle Parker, asking for an update on Line 5.
Sure. For those of you who don't know, Line 5 is the oil pipeline and other fossil fuel pipelines crossing the Straits of Mackinac in Michigan. Everybody should know that there is a series of reports coming out from a task force that is working in Michigan to review the risks and potential alternatives to Line 5 coming up later this year, and that's going to be available for public review and comment. But that's no reason to wait. Certainly, the chorus has grown, and through the work of some great leadership of some groups in Michigan, doing work to advance the idea that Line 5 needs to be shut down because it simply represents too big of a risk to the Great Lakes. And getting that message through consistently is really critical. Here at the Alliance, we are also working on other aspects of oil transport around the region and the potential risks posed to clean water through the pressure that the Great Lakes feels from the movement of massive amounts of oil from Superior, Wisconsin throughout the Great Lakes region. That's something you can actually keep an eye on our website for, because we'll be having some more reporting coming out on that in the coming couple of months.
Great. Thank you. So I think that's all of the questions. We did have somebody else submit an event about a lobby day about Line 5 on April 19th. Their website is oilandwaterdon'tmix.org.
And speaking of that, that's highly relevant to the comment about Line 5, so that's a great website to check out.
Exactly. Great. So I think see, the questions have kind of slowed down. As I said, we are going to be sending you all a thank you email and some information later on today, and we'll include in there information on connecting with your members of Congress, some of the resources that we mentioned today, and we'll also share a link to the slideshow and the audio from today in case you are super excited to listen to it again, or if you know of others who might be interested in listening in on this conversation as well. So Joel, do you have any closing remarks?
Again, just thank you to everybody who joined the call today and for the great diversity of questions we got. I'm so energized and inspired to see how engaged everybody is in the Great Lakes. And you've given me and us, and I think each other, a lot of confidence that we can continue to win the protection and restoration of the Great Lakes, regardless of what's going on in Washington, and with the support of the people in D.C. who really understand how important this great source of clean water is to everybody here in the region. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and that concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much for participating. Bye-bye.